and willing to go back energized to take on a new world.
Let's work together better, faster, in order to deliver a better.
To try new ideas, to learn from each other.
Be proud of all the good that diamonds do. You know, we have so much to be proud of. I didn't have time to talk all about the amazing things this industry has done during this crisis in support of local communities and more. Ours is an industry that can emerge stronger from this crisis.
But anyway, I was just introducing myself. Peter Sheahan's my name. And over the last many years, I've been working with many of the site holders, a number of retailers and De Beers themselves around what it's really going to take to transform the diamond industry, and to put in the words of Bruce Cleaver and the De Beers team, to pioneer a new diamond world. And what I'd like to say at this point, right up front in the call, is whilst we are going to be talking today about finding opportunity in disruption and about pioneering this new world, there's myself and all the panelists that are on the call do know that COVID's a very serious situation, and that what we really hope for all of you and your families is that you're healthy and that you're well. And as the industry has done so far, that we continue to put our people first, because clearly it is a challenging time. But with that said, this is the Stronger Together series, and we do want to dive into what we can collectively do as an industry to pioneer this new world. And I'm joined with three leaders from the De Beers team today in order to have that conversation. We have Bruce Cleaver, the CEO, who I know you would have heard from early in the Stronger Together series as well. We have Stephen Lussier, the EVP of Marketing for De Beers as well. I'm going to talk a lot about the consumer and where the emerging opportunities are and what we're learning about what they value and where the opportunities will come from that. And then we also have Paul Rowley, the EVP for Diamond Trading, who's going to talk about exactly what we need to do now in order to seize these opportunities as we pioneer this new diamond world. So a couple of things before I get started. I'm going to kick off here with some questions and discussion with Bruce here in just a moment. But I just want to invite all of you, feel free to post a question. We're going to be running Q&A as we go. I'll be seeing those questions, and whilst we'll have a more open discussion at the end, if there's particularly relevant questions posed, I'm going to interject them live into the conversation. So with that small bit of housekeeping and that welcome and our best wishes to you and your family, Bruce, I'm going to kick off with you. There's no way we could have really predicted COVID-19, but we certainly were talking about a lot of trends as recently as the end of just 2019. Many trends, I would say, that are obviously being accelerated by the quote unquote the crisis that we face right now. So I wonder if maybe right up front in this call, Bruce, you could set a little bit of context for us about where the industry's at and what you think this means for us collectively at this point in the cycle.
Thanks, Pete. And firstly, welcome to everybody, and thanks very much for joining us. It's great to be with you, albeit virtually. A year ago, we were together discussing the theme that we'll talk a little bit about today, all together, and a lot has happened, as Pete says, in a year. It has, of course, been an extraordinary time in the diamond industry. I would say the last 3 months have been the most extraordinary, and in many ways the most difficult we've ever faced. But actually, many of the things we spoke about last year at the BES have come to pass or are coming to pass. And although it's been a very difficult time for everybody in the last few months, I think we are getting to a point where we're starting to see reasonable recovery in some places and very good in others. And we're also starting to see some of those issues about supply that we've spoken about before. So actually, the industry fundamentals at this point look to me to be in a pretty reasonable shape, provided we can all get through this period, as you say, Pete, most importantly, safely, but we can all get through this period in a way where we are ready for emerging demand. And I think that's about the point we are at now. You know, we speak a lot about supply. We spoke a lot about supply at the previous BES. There's little doubt that supply, global supply of rough diamonds has peaked and is starting to come down. If you take the short term, you'll see that in this year, there's a considerable amount less rough production than there was last year. You'll know, of course, that at De Beers, we've lowered our production guidance earlier in the year from between 32 to 34 million carats to a revised 25 to 27 million carats. That's 7 million carat reduction, about 25% of our production. You'll know that other producers have reduced their production by similar amounts, and I think that's very positive. But even medium to long term, I think we see that in the crisis, a number of smaller operations have had to go into care and maintenance, sometimes caused by COVID, sometimes caused for economic reasons. A number of them are struggling with their financial future. And I think it's fair to say that some of them will not reopen, whilst that's, of course, sad for the individual businesses. I think from a point of view of global supply, I think that puts the diamond industry in a very good space, because I'm pretty sure that supply has now peaked and will now start to decline. And I think you will see this over a number of years. And so, of course, as long as demand continues to grow and as long as we collectively can drive demand, that should lead to a very good outcome. And in fact, this outcome might get to us quicker than we might have thought. Stephen will talk more about some of these signs of demand emerging. And there's been some very, very encouraging signs of demand bouncing back in China. So what I take away from that is that right now, at the end of June in 2020, is people have no less desire for our amazing product than they had before. Absolutely not. In some senses, of course, we may be better positioned than others to capture even more desire. So if we can continue to work together to drive demand, supply should, to a large extent, take care of itself. I actually think that the industry, in a strange way, Pete, has probably got itself into a position where we should, if we get through this period together, which we will, actually be in a stronger position than we might have thought this time a year ago.
Yeah, Bruce, in fact, it was this time a year ago when you talked passionately about leading and pioneering a new diamond world. And I know COVID certainly hasn't dampened that ambition. And the good news we're starting to see, and I know Stephen's going to talk about that, I imagine has you even more excited perhaps to really drive and accelerate that transformation from the front. But I have a pretty specific question. How has COVID-19 made it even more important that we collectively pioneer that new world?
You know, we spoke a lot at the BES, as you say, about the industry. We said, for example, the industry is as we made it. We said that the industry was on the cusp of change and that the rules of the game were changing. We said that purpose-driven businesses would probably be more successful in the future. And we said that we could foresee a world where the world was more connected by intelligent data, and we could use that better to drive better insights. Actually, I think COVID has probably accelerated all of those. So I think the most important point remains desire. And as I said earlier, Stephen will talk to us more about this, but no question that consumers desire the product at least as much as they used to. In fact, coming out of COVID, I think if we do our jobs right, we should be able to capitalize on that, because there's not one person alive who hasn't sat and thought throughout COVID about the things that really matter to them in life and the things that don't. And I think things probably matter less, relationships matter much more. And of course, diamonds can capture those wonderful moments in relationships in a way that fashion items can't. So in a sense, the trend of moving to brands whose social purpose identifies with millennials, Generation Z, baby boomers, etc., has probably been accelerated, and I think that's a wonderful opportunity for us to capture. There's no question that the trend to digitization is happening quicker, and that COVID has allowed that. If you think about your own businesses, I doubt we could have run De Beers 5 years ago all from home, but we absolutely have been able to. It hasn't always been easy, but we have been able to. So the trend to digitization, to online, and as much to omnichannel, I think will continue. So yeah, it will be difficult for some bricks and mortar businesses, but there will be a place for them. The question, I think, will be those who win will embrace the omnichannel strategy better and will embrace digital better. I think it's important in difficult times that you take some bold actions and you take some big bets. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about some of the things that De Beers is doing, some of the stuff we've done in the past. I think it will be important, but if you pick the right offering, if you pick the right way of going about it, and you transform your business in the way we were talking about over the last few years, I think COVID has done nothing other than accelerate the need to deliver a strategy quicker. It hasn't changed, I would have thought, anyone's strategy end to end. And of course, there's no reason at all to think that we will succeed unless we work together even more. And of course, these seminars are all about that kind of thing. So when I look back at COVID, Pete, I don't think it's caused us to rethink radically a strategy. I think it's caused us to think, how do we accelerate where we were going anyway, do it in a smarter way, and obviously for 2020 in a way, as everybody is going to suffer from less profit, in a way where you can do it slightly cheaper and more profitably.
Thanks, Bruce. Bruce, as I think about that, there's a couple of things you said there that are important, and I'm also tracking the audience questions and commentary. Number one, you talk about driving demand, and that really is a critical piece of what we do have to do collectively, because, and I know, Stephen, we're going to dive into this when we chat to you, mate, about, you know, there is this emerging meaning and this desire that's still there, not just for the product, but potentially even more desire, but it's not just going to manifest itself on its own. And I think that idea of driving demand and doing it collectively. Bruce, I'm not going to put you on the spot to make a massive projection, but there was a comment here about how long it might take for demand to return to previous levels. And I thought I might comment for the participants. There is research in crisis management called projection bias, where they ask people how long they think their current emotional state or the challenges they face will likely last into the future. And in all recent crises, people have massively overestimated how long they're going to feel that way. And so I actually think we have to be careful as an industry not to buy too much into the pessimism of the broader news story. And as you're going to find out today, to really intentionally buy in optimistically to what's happening. But Bruce, I promise I won't ask you to project exactly when demand will hit previous levels. But what I do want to ask you to talk about is, you know, pioneering a new diamond world isn't just about commercial activity. It's about acting like a leader. And I think from the outside, certainly, the industry seems to have done an incredible job of pioneering, and not only a new diamond world, but pioneering a new way of behavior and of corporate citizenship and things like purpose that you talked about. I wondered if you might comment a little bit on some of the great things you've seen across the industry.
Yeah, Pete, that's a great question. And I can really say I've never been prouder to lead De Beers than I am now. And I've never been prouder to be a big participant in the diamond industry than I am today, because all of us, that's De Beers and the entire industry, have gone about tackling the challenges of COVID in a way that I think we should all be proud of. I know that each and every one of you across the world has made a significant effort to help with COVID relief, not only in your own organizations, but also in the wider communities around you. So I see on a daily basis tens of stories from customers of ours of amazing stuff they're doing, whether it's donating to COVID relief in cash or in kind. There are lots of people doing amazing things with their 3D printing facility, printing face masks for healthcare workers to use. There are people making an amazing amount of ventilators, really desperately needed medical equipment. There are even people in China trying to work on making splitters so you can turn one ventilator into two ventilators. And I see examples of this across the sightholder community and across the diamond industry every day. The retailers all over the world, and they are suffering as much as anyone, are doing amazing stuff with their communities. Many of the smaller retailers, or many of the independents, for example, are doing great work in their own communities with food parcels, with helping people with kind of basic needs which they might not otherwise have met. So across the whole industry and across the retail world, I've seen wonderful examples of people doing amazing things to help communities. And at De Beers, of course, our whole mantra is about helping communities. For us, things like corporate social responsibility, which might in the old days have been something that you did sort of on the side, are now absolutely core to the De Beers business. It is the De Beers business. We've donated, between us and our joint venture partners, significant sums of money in excess of $10 million around the world in order to help with COVID relief. And I'm very proud of the fact that a lot of it has been done by donations in kind. So in places like Botswana and Namibia and South Africa, not only in our mines, and it's very important there for obvious reasons, I'll come back to that, but also in our communities and our relationships with our government partners, we've been able to donate state-of-the-art COVID testing machines. But not only that, we've been able to teach the staff to use them. We've donated tens of thousands of automated testing kits. And that's the kind of area we focused on in places like Namibia. We focused on fresh sanitary water for people who are unable to get it otherwise. In Botswana, our joint venture there has made its hospitals available, made its ambulances available, and we've made our facilities in St Andrew's House in London, all of them available for NHS key workers to stay in. And I can give you endless examples of these. For us, and the reason that it's so important is our communities are De Beers. And if we're not welcomed in our communities, and if we don't earn their trust, we don't really deserve to exist as a business. So a lot of this relief is around communities and helping communities. We spend a lot of time making our mines the safest places they can be. We've designed safety protocols in mines with all kinds of COVID relief available. That is absolute state of the art. A lot of help here from Anglo American. So that when our people go to work, we can make sure that they're as safe as they can be. And if they do get tested positive, we can help them isolate, quarantine, and hopefully return to work in the community. So I think everyone in the industry should be really proud of the amazing work that people have done. And I think that is one of the reasons the diamond industry will come back stronger, because I think very much that's the kind of thing consumers rightly should expect from all of us in the future.
Bruce, a couple more quick questions for you before I transition it to chat to Stephen a little bit. What about at De Beers specifically? So beyond community investment, you have a deep commitment to innovation and to driving the industry forward. I'm sure there's things you can't put a name to necessarily right now, but you want to give a hint to the industry of some of the things that you're doubling down on and continuing to invest in?
Yeah, so I think one of the challenges we all face as leaders, and I'm sure all of you on the call will recognize this, is this really difficult balance at a time like this between saving costs, and obviously you've got to do whatever you can to do that, increasing profitability, but also not taking your eye off investing in the future. So we've tried very hard over the last 3 months, and we'll continue to do this, to try and balance the need to save costs, the need to, as you've heard me say, slow down production. And I should remind people that is not a cheap or simple exercise. It requires a lot of thought and a lot of planning. But trying to balance that with continuing to invest in the future. So Stephen will talk to you about marketing in a minute and some of the thoughts we have about stimulating demand in the second half. But lots of other things going on, things like Tracer, our groundbreaking blockchain project, but it's not really a blockchain project, that's the platform. It's an artificial intelligence project building us all digital assets. We continue to invest in that, and even though it's been very difficult for the Tracer folks, given there's not really been a functioning rough market, they've really focused on ensuring that the tech is absolutely perfect. So going in through this period, they've refocused where they're working in order to ensure that we come out of it better. We're working on all kinds of other pieces of innovation. You've come to expect that from us at De Beers, and we are working on a significant piece which we'll be able to announce, I would hope, in the next couple of months, which I think is, again, very much in the interests of all of us and the industry. Another area I'm very proud of is the work we do standing with women and girls. I think we all know, for example, how much gender-based violence has increased over the lockdown period and the awful stories that you hear there. Notwithstanding all the financial pain that we've been taking, we've continued to invest in that, and we've made a significant donation via our partners in this UN Women to assist gender-based violence shelters and organizations to help women and girls, not only women and girls, but principally women and girls who are suffering in this awful period. So we continue to focus on the future. We continue to work a great deal on technology in relation to making mines more efficient, more profitable, and obviously less invasive from an environmental point of view. So I'm very pleased that we've been able to keep focused on innovation, and so that we can continue to drive it and use it as a big tool for our future.
Bruce, you mentioned bold actions. And so just last question for you, and it's a sort of a personal question. There must have been moments where you felt as a leader like you needed to be particularly reactive or defensive, and you've just gone through a plethora of continued investment and community investment. How have you personally juggled the need to both be bold? How have you managed to get yourself into that optimistic, bold kind of space? Just at a personal level, I think that could be instructive for all of us.
Yeah, I mean, I have thought a lot about this over the period, as I know all of you do. I mean, I guess the first thing to say, Pete, is this, it's not easy. And let me not pretend it's been an easy time. And I know it's not been an easy time for any of our customers. It's not easy, and it's particularly difficult, I think, when you're in a leadership position in a time that is difficult. But, you know, I have a very, very strong team that I work with, and I think that's probably the single most important thing. The second thing I think is you've got to have the courage of your convictions to see the process through. It's too easy, I think, to design a strategy which sounds good in good times and then stop doing it when you hit bad times, because, you know, the world is a cyclical world and we will always reach upturns, downturns, etc., etc. So I think it is important that you can maintain the courage of your convictions and that you can see your way through it. And of course, there have been days when the news has only been bad and a number of us have thought, wow, it's really tough. But, you know, in those days, you get these amazing sparks of people around the De Beers Group and, of course, all of our site holders, and you see amazing good that people can do. And I think that always inspires me to get up the next morning and continue to try and push the team, the leadership team at De Beers, to get through this safely, and to position ourselves to be ready for the future. So, you know, I mean, it's a time, of course, when you learn a lot about yourself and a time when you learn a lot about your colleagues. But I'm sure we'll look back on this time and say I wouldn't have had it any other way, because we would have learned so much more in these 3 to 6 months than we might have in a 5-year period. So that's how I try to look at it as I deal with it day by day.
Well, I appreciate that, Bruce. And I'm going to circle back with you and the rest towards the end of the call. And please keep the comments coming through. I've seen a couple of questions around coordination and working together. We're going to visit those for sure right now. But, you know, Bruce talked about team, and Stephen Lussier, who leads marketing for De Beers, is on the call. Stephen, we're super excited to dive in here, not just to consumer trends, but to some really compelling data that's coming out of core markets around where we're at right now. I know you're a bit of a research hound. I know you're constantly looking at the numbers. One of the things I've been tracking is the McKinsey research on consumer sentiment. And I know offline that you've been looking at that as well. 35 plus countries with incredibly positive news in terms of consumer sentiment, particularly out of markets like US and China. I mean, were you surprised to see that? I imagine you're pretty excited to see that. I'd love to just hear your comments as we get started in conversation with you.
Yeah, I think, Peter, you probably got the two words. I was a bit surprised, and but it's good to have, in this environment we've been in for the last 3 months, a surprise. It's a positive one rather than another problem. And I think we'll talk a little bit about some of that inherent optimism that we see in consumers in some of our most important markets. But I guess, you know, it's sort of the backdrop to that, and I think why we're seeing sometimes some surprising data is that this has been an extraordinary experience for consumers. I mean, we've all been through it, but sometimes we think about going through it as in terms of the business. Sometimes you have to think about what it means to you personally as a consumer. And, you know, there hasn't been an issue like this in history where you've been, in effect, put into house arrest with your immediate family for a long period of time, and then separated from other parts of your family, particularly parents, or for children, grandparents, and vice versa, or sisters and brothers who you're not allowed to see except through the Zoom. And you're all experiencing, you know, a real health challenge. So you've got fear as well at the same time. This is very, you know, unique thing. And I think it has an impact on people. I've always said to be a good diamond marketer, you have to be part psychologist and part marketer, because diamonds are are deeply considered and symbolic and relationship driven purchase in many ways. And I think that's what we've seen here. So people have gone through this experience and they've been changed by it. And sometimes for the diamond business in the short run, it ain't so good because they get, we've seen applications for divorces go up, but we've also seen the opposite. So if you've come through this, you're in a different mind state about what's important to you in life, and you've been surrounded by those things which are most important to you. And I think this experience of how it affects you and your relationships is very important. We'll come on, I'm sure, and talk a little bit about that. But it seems also, as the process ends and people begin to emerge, that we see surprising, despite all the economic challenges which we know many people will face, we have this sense of optimism that the worst is behind them and that better days are to come. And that's partly what this McKinsey data was showing, where in China, it's sort of 90% plus, and in America, even 80% plus, people thinking that looking out just a few months into the future that COVID will be behind them and that their lives will be getting back to normal. Now, we may find it takes a little longer in some places, and there are other markets in the world that are probably further back on that track and haven't got to the point yet where they're getting released. But I think it seems to be connected with the idea of lockdowns ending, re-emerging into the world, a sense that as a result of that, the worst of the problems are behind, and now we can get more positive. And we know that people have to be generally positive about their future expectations in order to be in a real diamond buying mode. So I was really encouraged to see that McKinsey data, and I think more importantly, we see it improves, each month out. So it was weaker when we go back in China in mid-Feb when they were locked down. It was weaker when we go back to the beginning of May in the US. And as they come out, it improves. So I think that, it's only a set of data points, but it's encouraging.
Stephen, you mentioned US and China. US and China obviously being huge markets for the industry, and China potentially being an early indicator of how other markets face. I'm going to get you to comment on US and China in a second, but I think given those comments and that optimism, the elephant in the room is probably the recent sort of pullbacks of some of the easing of lockdown in both of those markets. Do you see a situation where we end up back in full lockdown? I mean, how do you see that playing out? And then I might go from there to have you talk specifically about China and specifically about the US.
Yeah, I've seen, Peter, so many predictions about what's going to happen when. I've gotten tentative about making any in this world of COVID and health. But, I think the general consensus is that the days of national-wide lockdowns like that we've all gone through are behind us. I think we are learning, whether it's looking at China or even now some cities in the US where they didn't seem to have the full force of COVID in the beginning. We're seeing it emerge. It pops up a bit like a children's toy, and you have to whack it down. And we see that if the governments are well organized, that they can manage that process, and that its impact on the overall global business now was nothing like when we had a national lockdown and virtually all the stores across the countries were shut. There was a period in China where 95% of the doors were closed, similarly in America. And I don't think we're going to see anything like that. But I think we should prepare ourselves that there will be these localized flare-ups. Government should be in a position to deal with them. We'll have to be flexible about that. But we shouldn't think necessarily that means we should definitely not think that means we're retreating to a period that we've come out of, both in China and the US, where we've had this total lockdown. It's likely to be very isolated and localized, and hopefully relatively short term compared to the very long lockdowns that we've experienced.
Yes, Stephen, the numbers out of China are pretty good, and some of the early numbers out of the US are as well. Do you want to maybe talk quickly to those two markets, not to go over data that the industry may already have, but what are you seeing at De Beers? What are some of your early retail numbers starting to show in terms of the research you're seeing?
Yeah, and I think it's probably a pattern that we'll see as other markets in the world emerge from lockdowns. And I guess the advantage we've had a little bit is we've watched China, which is a couple of months ahead of our major market, America, and we can watch what the behavior is like during it. Now, again, during the lockdown period, sales were really, figures I've never imagined could be true for a month. Minus 80, minus 90%. I mean, that's unheard of. But that's in the period of peak lockdown, and it's not surprising. It doesn't mean consumers don't want to buy. It means there are no stores to buy in open. So it's a very unique period. Then as lockdown begins to ease and stores open again, there's a little bit of a period, a few weeks, where people are hesitant, I think, as consumers about whether it's safe to go back out. And we saw traffic levels didn't return overnight in China, but week by week over the months, sort of middle of March and into April, we saw the traffic levels climbing again. People got more comfortable going into store environments. They got used to the social distancing, the new normal of social distancing requirements in stores. And then purchasing started to come back. And now it's come back really extraordinarily strongly. In China, the month of May for our own brands was one of our best months ever. So what are we seeing? In effect, we're seeing a few dynamics. So it's important to think. One is we're seeing those purchases that were delayed come forward. So certainly there's this lovely phrase, revenge purchasing in China, where young women who didn't have the opportunity to spend through lockdowns actually had this desire to spend, and diamonds have done pretty well there. But more importantly, we've heard the bridal business particularly strong. And I think that gets back to this concept of, okay, time to commit. I'm going to commit having come through this experience. And we're also seeing the impact of which I think will be a trend we see through this year, of the lack of travel. So Chinese consumers who typically, if we look at the entire diamond jewelry market, about 20% of their purchases are made overseas when they're traveling for diamonds. Now, you can't travel easily to Hong Kong, to Macau, and certainly to Paris. Wasn't possible. So people are localizing sales on the one hand, but secondly, we have to remember in all of our surveys, Peter, the number one competitor for us in diamond jewelry sales, particularly romantic ones, is travel. And travel, highly restricted, gives us a competitive advantage, and I think we're seeing some of that in China. Now, of course, in the US, they've come out of lockdown.
Stephen,
sorry, Peter.
Just quickly, there was a comment earlier on the feed from one of our attendees that said, are we worried that people are going to feel guilty about purchasing diamonds as they come out of lockdown? And the China experience would suggest that that's not a real risk. I just want to honor that comment that was made, but it doesn't sound like that guilt. It sounds like relationships and meaning are trumping anything like a guilt-related conversation. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, and that's the same thing we're hearing. It's more anecdotal in America because the lockdown, has only just happened. As you say, in some places it's still pretty tight. But we're hearing in America, there are really two issues. One is the ability to reopen. So for independent jewelers, that process has happened much more quickly. And most of our independent jewelers across America are now open and conducting business. It's obviously been more challenging for the larger and particularly mall-based jewelers and department stores. That's been a slower opening process, and probably people are a bit more resistant to going into those environments, a bit like we saw in China. It took a little bit longer before people went into the more crowded shopping experiences. But in America, we're hearing the same. I mean, the independent data we're seeing is showing that the month of June so far is up on a year ago. So there's some encouragement there as well. Now, anecdotally, what we're hearing is a lot about this idea of the two things we're hearing. One is this idea of it's time actually to basically say thank you to your wife and show appreciation, because she's probably the one that carried a heavy load lockdown experience, particularly if the children weren't at school as well at the same time. And there's a lot of career women who have been doing quite a lot of things during lockdown. And there's a sense that actually I should recognize that. So we're hearing about gift giving of diamonds. And again, it's not about gift giving, it's about gift giving of diamonds because of their symbolic meaning and that which they communicate about appreciation and a commitment and that sense of bond. And we're hearing directly about people who've had big anniversaries in this period and said, well, we can't go away now, so we're going to upgrade the diamond earrings. And this sense that you need to do something to mark these occasions, and one of those options is no longer available, and we're taking a bit of share from that. So it's very early days in America, and there's still a long way to go to rebuild sales to the pre levels to a large degree, because not all of the retail networks across all of the sectors, are reopening at the same rate. So we still have a ways to go. But again, I think we're seeing the same encouraging signs that we're seeing from China.
Stephen, maybe a last question for you before we duck across and have a quick chat to Paul as well. But what I'm taking out of your remarks, and certainly some of the comments Bruce made up front, is that whilst there is a short-term opportunity here, which is being clearly indicated by what's happening in China and the US, and I'm sure Paul will have some comments on what we have to do to seize that opportunity. There seems to be a bigger, and I might be just sort of out on my own here, but there seems to be a much bigger opportunity for the market as a whole, whereas as people are looking to signify meaning, looking to continue to symbolically show their commitment to their relationships, that in some ways the COVID lockdown could be a once in a generation opportunity to position diamonds, even more significantly than it already is, as the ultimate symbol of that meaning, of that commitment, of that connection, of that relationship, of that sort of, less things better kind of vibe that we're seeing out there. Am I reading too much into your comments, or is that what you're basically saying, that there's this bigger piece here and we should be getting after it?
Yeah, we've been doing some research through the COVID process to try to understand this environment. And, clearly one has to watch what happens in the economic world. You can't wish away the economic impact, and we'll have to see how that develops over the months to come. But interestingly, when we think about competing for the available share of discretionary expenditure, we've seen two things from our research, which we're doing now literally every 2 weeks in the US. And the two emerging trends from that about consumers is, one, I've talked a little bit already, but this idea that you need to buy this Christmas gifts which are meaningful is the word that they use. And they contrast that to goods or gifts which are practical or are more about fun or more about disposability, or even technology. Surprised me a little bit. I would have thought, as we've been all glued to our computers, technology would be higher. Maybe we're just sick of it now. But this idea that you want something meaningful, and for jewelry, that's really fundamental for us. This concept of meaningful, and for diamonds, it's fundamental. So there's an opportunity for us if we can tap into this idea of meaningfulness. And then the second thing that we came up was, and this sometimes is related to the emotional experience of COVID and the issues that it raises about the way in which we treat the world, and issues around sustainability, which become important, and not consuming too many things wastefully. So this idea, and partly I think from the economy, when the economy is tough, you also want to think about what you buy. So we're seeing again this idea that you should buy things now as gifts that have the ability to last, and not be things that you should buy with the idea that I forgot it a year ago and I throw it out now and buy something new. This idea of you should spend your money on things that have a combination of that sustainability to the world, and also timelessness, enduring value. And these are classic words for jewelry and super classic words for diamonds. So the opportunity is there. It won't just materialize though if we don't do anything about it. So as an industry, we need to find the the alignments that allow us to capitalize on that concept. Now, De Beers is going to do its thing, as Bruce talked about a bit. If there's ever a time for a diamond is forever, it must be it now, huh? As an idea. The Natural Diamond Council is producing an entirely new marketing campaign for the second half of the year that's going to focus on this idea of a diamond really being the bond between relationships, not only husband and wife, but all the relationships that take place in a person's life, and communicate that in a very contemporary way to attract new consumers. And I think the key, though, is for the rest of us as an industry to align on these two key ideas. We don't have to all do it, identically, but we all need to make sure that we're farming those insights and driving on where the opportunity lies for us. And I think there'll be a lot of engagement collectively between leading industry marketers to make sure we've got that insight and that we're driving our Q4 programs so they collectively work to really to develop this opportunity for diamonds. It is there for us. We can maximize market share in the luxury goods, I think, more this year than any, but we need to do it. It requires action.
And collective action, for sure. Stephen, I appreciate that. I'm going to segue Paul over to you. Paul Rowley, I'm sure many of you know, EVP of Diamond Trading at De Beers. Paul, Ray Dalio is one of the most famous hedge fund traders of all time. In fact, arguably the most successful hedge fund manager of all time, said that the real secret to success in business is betting against consensus and being right. And so I think we're posed with this really interesting challenge right now, which is, in order for us to get after that meaningful gifts opportunity that Stephen talked about, we're going to need to be moving now. But we're seeing, all sorts of mixed news out there in the world. And so in some ways, that acting boldly and being courageous comments that Bruce made, we really need to ask of the whole diamond industry, from retailers through the mid-market, and obviously De Beers continues to be in that space as well. Is now the time that we need to place a bet? Is now the time, do you believe, that we need to start sort of acting on these early but clear indicators of opportunity and intent? Or should we continue to be conservative? I'd just love to hear you kind of weigh in on that. A bit of probably a loaded question perhaps there for you, Paul.
I think it's an interesting point because we speak a lot about, and we have done it over the past few years, but specifically this time last year at the BS, we spoke about this pioneering of a new diamond industry. And I think you kind of hit the nail there when you said we all need to build that. We may have a vision and have shared that as De Beers, but it's a collective vision. And I think we all need to be on that train together. So as I come and look at what is the timing, I think, as we've come into this, we have seen some tremendous collaboration already, and we've seen some great things from the industry. Bruce mentioned the great things that De Beers have been doing to make sure that our communities are both safe and are receiving the right PPE and equipment throughout that. But it wasn't just De Beers that was doing that. And I think what's great about how we do collaborate and share and make sure we're doing the right things right is that the entire industry has done that. And we've seen some fabulous CSR coming to play in both India and across the globe, in all of our operations, to be honest with you, and not just within the countries in which they operate, but to be fair, also spreading the word beyond that, whether it's PPE or food or anything else. And then it comes down to what is the timing. And I think to some extent we've spent a lot of time making sure we're doing those right things right, and we've been putting our businesses into a better position to tackle the future. But to the point of listening to Stephen is that train pulling into the station now. And I think to answer Ray's question, it's the ones who step on the train are willing to take that bold action and prepare for the future and accept that there is a degree of uncertainty within it, but willing to place the bet. We have to have confidence in our product, and we have to have confidence in the fact that we will have a season, and we need to move towards that season at some stage in the very near future, at least.
Yeah, I mean, one of the challenges of any industry is what is the distance between demand signals and responsiveness of the market. And, obviously the diamond industry needs to get ahead of the trend for two reasons. Number one, it is a fairly sort of long value chain at times. But number two, demand isn't just reacted to, demand is also created to. So I guess the question I have for you, Paul, is what would you like to see from the industry in the next weeks and months as we prepare for that season and as we board that train, fueled up and ready to go?
And look, I think we have lead and lag indicators, and what Stephen is suggesting that there's now some lead indicators into a more positive world. And I think the way we've responded to the negativity of this time, the ability to close down, as I said, to make sure that we're doing the right things right, and to put our organizations and our businesses into a better and fitter place to come out of this. There's been some excellent work already done. I think the positioning of the industry to make sure that it's pulling down its stock, it's trying to sell through where there has been opportunity, it's making sure it's looking at some of those issues around debt and making sure that debt is coming down to a better position to capitalize effectively on the opportunity that's coming. What I'd like to see from the industry is really standing back and looking within and understanding that there is a pipeline to delivering polish into the future. And as much as we got stock into the system, we mustn't miss that opportunity to ensure that we have sufficient product available when that pull comes. And in the same way as we saw a rapid shutdown, we're not necessarily seeing immediately the pull through in the midstream, but we are seeing some encouraging consumer data coming out of particularly our main market in the US now, but also China. And if we don't have the conviction to follow through on that, then we will run the risk of really missing the delivery into that season. And those orders will come, and what we really need to do is believe in our product and what it can do for the future.
Yeah, we like to say sometimes here at Karrikins that the secret to doing that is to be intentionally optimistic. That is to take those leading indicators, and whilst there are intuitive parts of you that want to resist and sort of react and be a little overly cautious, there is a time where we do have to move forward and we do have to bet against consensus. And I think we're seeing enough evidence of that. I also would suggest that this relates to Bruce's comments around courage. You know, if we're going to convert these opportunities, we do need to be courageous. Paul, there are a bunch of site holders on the call. I looked at the invitation list, and I know many of the site holders well at this point. They would never speak to me again if I didn't ask you about the contract. Now, obviously, you've had a front seat to kind of driving a new type of partnership in the industry, and I know the contract's a big part of that. Just so we're not overwhelmed with email afterwards, can you talk a little bit about the evolving nature of that right now?
No, absolutely. And look, what I think is, I mean, we've been on this journey for quite a while. So we've had a contract in place now that's been extended twice due to various issues around the industry at the moment in time. But I think, if anything, what it's done to us is emphasize the need for change. And part of what we've discussed with yourself as well, Pete, over these number of years of business excellence seminars is that need for change, that need to be responsive to a market, and really to differentiate ourselves and to avoid the commoditization of our product, which links into a lot, I think, of what Stephen was saying about where the opportunity is. And to do that, you need a differentiated product. Well, we need a differentiated contract as well. And a lot of what we've been putting into place is understanding our customers a lot better. So Bernard and the team throughout this entire period have been working collaboratively, and it is about a collaboration at the end of the day. It's about a partnership that ensures that we have a better understanding and a better interaction through account planning to understand each other's businesses better and to look to the future, and specifically around understanding what is the manufacturing need, what is distribution, how do we make sure, to the points that we're starting on here, that the timing is right to deliver. We can only do that if we know our customers and our customers know us, and we are working interactively to ensure that we achieve the same end goal. So when we look at this contract, we had a pause, of course, as we all wanted to concentrate on making sure, as I said earlier, that we're doing the right things right, and just to sort of stand back a little bit. We reintroduced the continuum of the contract application process, and we've actually received those over the weekend, and we're determined, along with our customers, to make sure that we're in a much better position looking forward, that as a contract that's more flexible, adaptable, has the ability to really drive this industry to be in a better state, to be honest, to cope with some of the challenges that we're seeing today. I had a call earlier on this morning where one of the conversations was around when do I think things will get back to normal? My response was basically never to what it was before, but it will get to a new normal. Now it's our choice on what that new normal will be. We can work collaboratively, we can create our own future. We can very much be around collectively pioneering a new industry, and I think that's what we've got to get to. And that will be through much better interaction, and the new contract will enable that. And it will also distinguish between different groups of customers Too often we talk about a site or a fraternity, but actually we have very different business models operating in different places. And we want to make sure that we're aligning appropriately, just as we would with our product segmentation, to ensure that that can move forward in the right way. And I think it's a really exciting time now to really assess that, because in many ways we spent last year really as an industry going through some great pain in itself about an industry issue. And luckily we did, because I think if we'd gone into this particular crisis at the same time last year, we would have had a much greater catastrophe. It may sound strange to say that when we're feeling as we are at the moment, but it would have been far more severe. I think as we look to the future now, what we really got to come to grips with, what have we done? Really celebrate that success of getting the industry into a more positive and a better position to be able to really get through this, actually. And we saw that optimism coming in January. It was short-lived, not through an industry perspective, but from an external force that has allowed us actually to come through it, as I say, together. The next step has got to be to accelerate that process. And coming back to the first point, to Ray's point, I think, is the contract will enable us to work with people to collectively make the right decisions for this business for the longer term, and to make sure that we have a long-term and sustainable future. And that there will be more and more, no doubt it will come, that there will be other challenges, but I think the more we are collaborating and solving them together as we did the past challenges, then we'll be in a better position for the future.
Yeah. Well, Paul, I really appreciate your comments there, and I think it's fair to say the prime overarching theme of the conversation so far has been collectively and together. So we are pioneering a new industry, but we're doing it together, and that means real change, because if to overuse the cliche, if nothing changes, nothing changes. And obviously the way we partner and going deeper and better understanding the industry is a big part of that. I'm going to turn this over to all three of you now, but I want to address a couple of questions because I want to honor the audience's contribution here as well. And Bruce, my first question is actually to you. There's a question about, how long can De Beers sustain its stock positions, et cetera, that are helping to keep the industry strong and manage supply and demand. I guess it's a question of, how strong is De Beers and how strong is the commitment? And I feel like that's probably best answered by you.
Sure, glad to, Pete. Look, I went through at De Beers the 2008 and 9 experience, where we went into it with a very, very stretched balance sheet. And when we got out of it, and we did get out of it, and we got out of it really well in the latter half of 2010 and 2011, I remember thinking to myself, I'm never going to go into another downturn with a balance sheet in that position. And so actually going into this downturn, our balance sheet is in a tremendous position. We had about $1.5 billion of cash on the balance sheet going into this. And we've been managing it very, very carefully. So we are watching all expenditure. We've slowed production down considerably. As I mentioned, that comes with slowing down future projects a little bit, so that slows down stay in business capital, it slows down expansion capital, etc. We are, of course, backed by Anglo American now, and in 2008 and 9 we did not have a controlling shareholder, although Anglo American was a large shareholder. You've all heard Mark, and he's been at every one of our BESs since he's been in the chair. Anglo American is as committed to De Beers now as it ever was. So I'm very confident that if we can carry on managing our side of the equation, which we can, and we can collectively, as many of you have been speaking about, together build demand and get through this crisis, we'll actually come out of this in a very good position. So whilst of course it's my job to worry about that kind of thing, I can say we're in pretty decent shape for what has happened to us over the last few months, and I have no reason to have real concerns here.
Paul, would it be fair to say that a lot of the mid-market and the side holders have actually been in fairly strong positions coming into this as well? I know a lot of the work we've done at BES has been around not just innovation, but business excellence overall. And it sounds like not just De Beers, but a number of organizations critical to the industry have really done a great job of managing not just the people side of this, but the business and commercial side as well.
No, absolutely. I think we've seen that. Obviously, every business has got its individual attributes, but there's no doubt that if I look collectively across it, what the industry, in particular the midstream, went through last year as well was what created as a much stronger position entering this crisis, which is exactly where we need to be. But not only that, it's going through the crisis. I remember at the beginning of it in March, I was actually in Surat and talking to a number of our customers around cutting manufacturing and where we're sitting at that moment of time. And there was a sort of sense of that can't be done. Obviously, we have some very large, effectively, engines operating there. The ability to close down, the ability, as I said, to do the right thing with people and to have that responsiveness, I think, has been created over the past couple of years or so. That's seeing it in a much better, stronger position for the future. So that needs to be continued, though. And we need to ensure that we don't just flip back into something. So when we say the opportunity is there, we need to grasp it. It's exactly that, but it's agility that will really tell the true story, and making sure that we do have the ability to go through what Stephen was commenting on. Intermittent closures, reopenings, this will become the new normal of certainly in the foreseeable future. And we're seeing it again today in Surah, where there's been another closure. The ability to change and that agility, I think, will drive this industry. But I come back, it's about taking opportunities as they come. And I think I think there are many within it who are in a good position to do that. And we're already seeing some doing it, including, of course, those that have taken the opportunities to be in beneficiation, close to product, de-risked, perhaps geographically, being in one particular position. And I think, again, those are the sort of things that as we come out of this, we'll be seeing, I think, a lot of businesses really being well positioned for the future, actually.
Well, I'm going to ask one last question of each of you. I'm going to go you first, Paul, Stephen second, and then Bruce, I might have you answer and then close us out. But in 30 seconds or less, starting with you, Paul, what's the one ask you have of the audience after today's call?
I come back. I think it's belief. We have to believe in what we do. I think there's been a time where it's been quite rightly to shut it down and to make sure we're doing the right things over this period of time for our business. But ultimately, we are seeing things starting to open, and we shouldn't miss that opportunity. It is about timing, and it is about creating that agility to be willing to be bold and open, and likewise close when necessary, as appropriate and where. But I come back. Let's believe in our product. Let's believe in our industry, and let's move forward collectively together.
That's a pretty big ask. Nice. Stephen, what about you?
Yeah, I think the first challenge is for me to say anything in 30 seconds. It's not easy,
True.
But I'll try my best. I think in the retail scene and the consumer scene, what we've seen really is, we saw a long trend happening. Retail has not been easy in any event. There have been structural changes, and those things have now accelerated. Whether it's digital capability, whether it's the strong versus the weak, it's a time of change, and it's going to require us to be fast. And sometimes people say, "Oh, it's not a sprint; it's a marathon." Well, at the moment, it's like a 400 meters. We need to move at pace and cover a lot of distance and be ready for this Christmas. We don't want this season to be missed, and we need to move fast now in this really accelerating, changing downstream world.
Love it. And under a minute, Stephen, nice. Bruce, take us home. I'm going to hand over to Bruce now, actually, to wrap us as well. So.
Thanks, Pete. So I guess my one ask would be along the lines of what both my colleagues have spoken about. We've done amazing things together, and we will continue to do amazing things. We have a great future. We've got to keep the faith. We've got to take some bold actions. And I think it's incumbent on us to make the season the best we possibly can. And I think we will then be having a completely different conversation in the following year. So I know we can do it, and I'm looking forward to that happening. I guess just to wrap up, if I may, I think it's kind of weird that we're doing this all online. But as I said earlier, think about 5 years ago, we would have paralyzed businesses probably. So it's amazing what we have been able to do in really a very short space of time. It's great to connect with everybody. I was talking to Paul earlier today that although I don't miss travel, the one thing I really do miss is interacting, as Paul does even more than me, interacting with all of you. So it's been a great way to keep in touch. Please do keep sending us your thoughts and your questions. We'll keep the Stronger Together series going because it's important that we talk to each other. But we're really looking forward to seeing you all in person. And the most important thing, of course, of all between now and then and always is to keep safe and keep healthy. Thanks for joining us.